Catherine walked into the interview prepared to prove herself. What she didn't expect was to find her estranged sister seated on the panel, ready to sabotage her. Tasha thought Catherine would break under the pressure. But everything changed the moment her fiancé entered the room, and Tasha realized he was her boss. The wind off Lake Michigan cut sharper than usual that morning, threading its icy fingers through the gap in Catherine's coat collar. She pulled it tighter, shifting the weight of her leather portfolio from one arm to the other. Her shoes, though freshly polished, pinched cruelly at the sides. Another reminder that appearances often came at the cost of comfort. She stood in front of Aventus Logic's towering glass facade and paused. The building looked like it had been dreamed up by someone who found warmth to be a design flaw. Steel ribs wrapped in mirrored glass, with sharp angles and a hostility to color. Even the revolving doors turned like they were doing you a favor. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside. The lobby was everything she expected. A cathedral of white marble, chrome finishes, and the faint hum of success. Polished people in tailored suits strode confidently to elevators that glowed like portals. Digital screens blinked out corporate affirmations and departmental schedules with sterile cheerfulness. Catherine made her way to the front desk, careful to keep her smile professional. The receptionist, a young woman with impossibly winged eyeliner and a phone glued to her ear, didn't look up right away. "Name?" she asked flatly once she clicked off her call. "Catherine Malik. Here for the strategic development interview at 10 a.m. The woman's fingers fluttered over her keyboard. Then they stopped. Her brows lifted slightly as if confused. "I'm sorry, can you spell that again?" Catherine did carefully. "Twice." The receptionist frowned, glanced at the screen, and without meeting Catherine's gaze said, "You're not showing up on the candidate list." A cold trickle ran down Catherine's spine. "I was confirmed by email," she said, voice calm but firm. "I can pull it up if you need." The woman tilted the monitor slightly. Not enough for Catherine to see, just enough to make the message clear. "This isn't your domain." "Just have a seat for now," she said, already answering another call. "We'll figure it out." Catherine gave a tight nod and turned. The waiting area was all hard chairs and glass coffee tables. She picked the one seat, not facing a wall-mounted screen blaring muted stock updates. It happened to be across from the bathrooms, next to a dusty ficus that leaned like it wanted to die quietly. She sat, back straight, portfolio balanced on her lap. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. 2 men and a woman entered, each more polished than the last. The woman's pantsuit looked like it had been tailored mid-stride. One of the men gave Catherine a glance, a flicker of recognition or dismissal, she couldn't tell, before heading toward the elevators. All 3 were greeted, handed badges, and led upstairs. Still, no one came for her. Catherine was used to being overlooked. But this felt like more than a clerical error. And then she heard it. The unmistakable rhythm of Tasha's heels, 4 rapid clicks followed by a longer pause. Catherine would recognize that cadence anywhere. She froze. Her skin tightened, like it knew something she didn't. Tasha stepped into the lobby as though it belonged to her. She wore a navy blue blouse tucked into high-waisted trousers, her dark hair twisted into a bun so precise it looked airbrushed. A silver watch caught the light on her wrist, the same one their father gave her on his retirement, the one Catherine had been told was lost in the move. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. Tasha's gaze swept the room like a scan, impersonal, quick, surgical. Then it landed on Catherine. Their eyes met. No smile. No flicker of surprise. Just a sharp tilt of the chin, as if she were acknowledging an aunt, not a sister. Then, just as easily, she turned away. Catherine watched her lean into the receptionist, murmur something, and disappear behind the frosted glass of the executive elevators. Not a word spoken aloud. Not a single sign that they shared blood, history, or pain. And Catherine sat there, across from the bathrooms, next to a dying plant, holding a portfolio full of qualifications that meant nothing to the one person who could erase her with a nod. The glass doors closed behind Tasha, and the silence that followed was loud enough to hear her own pulse. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a message, a warning, and perhaps a trap. 2 months earlier, somewhere between civility and silence, they met at Roselle and Finch, a trendy cafe on the north side that Tasha liked to suggest when she wanted to appear casual while remaining in control. All soft jazz, Edison bulbs, and reclaimed wood. The place was the kind of polished bohemia that charged $8 for an oat milk latte and made you feel privileged for being allowed to sit. Catherine had arrived first, early as always. She picked a seat near the back, one that let her watch the door while keeping her back to the wall. Old habits. You learn to track exits when you grow up in a house full of invisible landmines and visible expectations. Tasha swept in 6 minutes late, right on brand. Her hair was pulled into a low, effortless knot that probably took 45 minutes to perfect. She wore a sand-colored trench, one lapel flipped deliberately, the hem of a cashmere sweater dress brushing just above her knees. Designer boots clicked softly on the reclaimed hardwood. "Catherine," she said with a smile that warmed no part of her face. "Still punctual. Some things never change." Catherine rose, offered a brief hug, arms around air, and sat down again. "Some of us still respect time," she replied, voice even. A barista appeared with Tasha's usual order already ready. Triple oat latte with cardamom, extra hot. Of course. Tasha had called ahead. They didn't speak for a moment. The clink of cups, the low hum of conversation around them. Catherine traced the rim of her mug. She wasn't sure why she'd agreed to this meeting. Some small, sad part of her still hoped for a thaw. Some stupid, surviving part. "So," Tasha began, stirring her drink like she was mixing paint. "What have you been up to since the last time?" Catherine hesitated. "I've been freelancing. Marketing strategy for a couple nonprofits. Working on getting back into a full-time role." Tasha smiled faintly. "Still doing the flexible thing, then?" There it was. The first cut. Neatly done, no blood drawn. Catherine chose not to bite. "Actually, I just applied to Aventus Logic. Strategic Development Division. They're expanding." Tasha's spoon froze mid-stir. "Oh," she said, lips parting just slightly. "That's ambitious." "I'm qualified," Catherine said, watching her closely. A long sip. A pause. Then, "Corporate culture can be competitive." The way she said it made Catherine blink. Like she was describing a jungle she'd already conquered. Like she wasn't just observing the danger, but choosing not to warn her out of sheer amusement. Still, Catherine nodded, not giving her the satisfaction of flinching. "I can handle competitive." Tasha's eyes sparkled over her cup. "Of course you can." Then she changed the subject without warning. Something about a friend's engagement party or a new yoga instructor who only took 6 clients. Catherine nodded, smiled in the right places, but her ears were still ringing. She left the cafe with the ghost of cardamom on her breath and a heavy stone in her gut. Later that night, as she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning its lazy circles, she replayed the conversation again and again. That line, corporate culture can be competitive. Not advice. Not concern. Not even arrogance. It had been a warning. And now, 2 months later, sitting next to a dying ficus outside the elevators that swallowed her sister whole, Catherine realized just how deeply that warning had run. Tasha had known. Even then. And she had smiled. 25 minutes. That's how long Catherine sat in the corner of the lobby, next to the ficus that hadn't seen water since Q4 earnings, before she stood up again. The silence hadn't just grown. It had matured into something hostile. Candidate after candidate had come and gone. They arrived in waves, briefcases, clean collars, LinkedIn-ready smiles, and were each greeted with friendly nods or ID badges that appeared as if by magic. Most didn't look her way. The few who did offered a polite, ambiguous glance, part sympathy, part competition, mostly dismissal. And still, her name was not called. Catherine straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the front of her jacket with one hand while the other gripped the portfolio like it was a shield. She walked back to the reception desk. The receptionist was still there, still not making eye contact. "Excuse me." Catherine said gently, but with an edge this time. Any update on my interview? The woman blinked, like Catherine had been a dream she forgot to forget. She glanced at her screen, tapped a few keys without conviction, and said, "Oh, they said you can join the next group going up." No explanation for the delay? Catherine asked, keeping her voice level. They didn't say, she replied, now very focused on her nails. Catherine bit back a sigh and nodded. Thank you. She turned and walked back to her seat, every step echoing louder in her own mind than in the gleaming lobby. She didn't sit down this time. Something about lowering herself again, physically, emotionally, felt wrong. She stood beside the ficus like a soldier waiting for orders. Then, 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and a tall man in a navy vest stepped out. He held a tablet and read a name aloud. Catherine Malik? She lifted a hand. That's me. He nodded and gestured her forward, offering a rehearsed smile. You'll be going up with the next group. Please follow me. She entered the elevator with 4 other candidates, 2 men, 2 women. All of them wore the same brand of scentless ambition and smart casual polish. No one spoke, not even the small talk kind. It was the silence of people calculating, rank, resume, room for failure. The elevator ride was smooth, frictionless. Like the people it carried, it didn't acknowledge weight. As they ascended, Catherine stared straight ahead at her reflection in the mirrored wall. Her eyes looked tired, more tired than she felt, and behind them, something had curled up and gone cold. The doors opened onto the 28th floor. A sea of glass offices spread out like a chessboard. The air was colder here, conditioned not just for temperature but for detachment. The man with the tablet motioned them to a glass-walled conference room at the end of the hallway. This will be your panel room, he said. You'll be called in one at a time. Water is on the table. Restroom is down the hall to your left. Good luck. Then he left. Catherine took a seat by the window, her hands flat on her lap. She could see part of the skyline through the glass, gray towers rising above the lake like indifferent gods. One of the other candidates opened a leather folio and began flipping through notes. Another checked his reflection in a phone screen. No one spoke. The first name was called. A woman with high cheekbones and a crimson blouse stood, nodded, and walked out. The others sat still. 10 minutes later, the second name was called. Then a third. Catherine waited. And waited. Her leg bounced once, then twice. She stopped it with deliberate effort. The fourth candidate was called, and now she was alone. She glanced at the clock. 30 minutes since they'd been brought up. Her name still unspoken. She stood, walked to the door, and peeked her head out. A receptionist at the end of the hallway looked up. Hi, Catherine said, managing a diplomatic smile. Just wondering if I've been skipped? The receptionist blinked. Oh, you're still waiting? Yes, she said, forcing calm. Everyone else from my group has already gone in. A brief shuffle of papers, a check on the monitor. Then, oh, looks like they want you last. Catherine's chest tightened. I see. Any particular reason? The woman shrugged. Not that I'm aware of. Sometimes the panel sets the order. Catherine thanked her, walked back to the room, and sat down slowly. Her name hadn't been lost. She hadn't been forgotten. They wanted her last. Not by chance. By design. And she already knew who was behind it. Because only one person in this building would choose to make her sit, alone, waiting, second-guessing everything, until she either broke or boiled over. Tasha. The game had started before she ever stepped foot in the room. And Catherine was already playing catch-up. When they finally called her name, it wasn't said like an invitation. It was said like a summons. Catherine Malik? Not a question. Not a welcome. Just protocol. She stood slowly, brushing invisible lint from her lapel, steadying her breath as she walked down the hallway. The walls were all glass, but somehow nothing felt transparent. Every reflection showed her a different version of herself. Younger, unsure, invisible. She blinked them away. The panel room was sleek and cold, like the lobby, but worse. A long, lacquered table stretched across the space, with 5 people seated behind it like judges at a sentencing. On the far end, with her fingers delicately folded and an expression as smooth as polished granite, sat Tasha. She didn't look up when Catherine entered. She didn't have to. Her presence filled the room like expensive perfume and ancient resentment. A man in a navy pinstripe suit gestured toward the chair in the center. "Miss Malik, thank you for joining us. Please take a seat." Catherine did carefully. She placed her portfolio on the table, spine aligned with the edge. She didn't let her eyes flick toward her sister. "Not yet." The man cleared his throat. "I'm Mr. Harlan, Director of Innovation Strategy. To my right is Ms. Walker from Organizational Development, and to my left," he gestured toward Tasha, who still hadn't acknowledged her, "is Tasha Malik, our Senior Strategic Consultant." Tasha smiled without teeth. "Hello, Catherine." There it was. Her voice. Cool, deliberate, and filled with implied footnotes. Catherine nodded. "Thank you for the opportunity." "Let's begin," said Mr. Harlan, clicking a pen. "We've reviewed your application and resume. You've had an interesting career path, freelance marketing, some nonprofit consulting, and a previous stint at Mercer and Riley as a junior strategist. Can you tell us why you left that role?" Catherine expected this question. She had rehearsed it. "I left to pursue more dynamic, project-based work. I learned a great deal at Mercer and Riley, but I felt I'd plateaued. I wanted to work in environments where strategy could be implemented faster, where the impact was more immediate." Ms. Walker nodded, scribbling a note. Mr. Harlan followed. "And during your freelance years, what would you consider your most challenging engagement?" Catherine gave a measured answer about helping a struggling arts nonprofit rebrand in 6 weeks with a shoestring budget and no team. She outlined the strategy, execution, and growth metrics. All facts, no embellishment. Her voice was calm, controlled. Then came Tasha. She leaned forward slightly, hands still folded. "Would you say that your freelance work filled the gaps in your career?" she said, "or that your career has had gaps you've tried to fill?" The question fell like glass. The room stilled. Catherine looked directly at her sister for the first time. Tasha's eyes were sharp. Polite. Predatory. "I'd say my freelance work demonstrated my ability to self-direct, adapt, and consistently deliver value, regardless of the structure around me," Catherine said, voice steady. "That doesn't feel like a gap to me." Mr. Harlan gave a small nod, but Tasha didn't blink. "I only ask," she said, "because strategic roles here require consistency, and consistency has to be proven, not just claimed." Another blade disguised as a question. Ms. Walker cleared her throat gently, shifting the energy. "Tell us about a time you had to challenge leadership to get a project back on track." Catherine smiled, genuinely this time. Finally, a question she could use. "At my last long-term client," she began, "the board was reluctant to shift focus from traditional donor events to digital engagement, even as ROI continued to fall. I prepared a 30-day engagement model using low-cost pilots and brought data to show projected impact. It wasn't about challenging leadership to be adversarial. It was about helping them feel safe while choosing a smarter path." She let that sit. Even Tasha had no comeback for that one. For the next 10 minutes, the questions continued. Some were fair. Some were designed to unsettle. But Catherine handled them all. Not flawlessly, but honestly, confidently, with a balance of humility and fire. Then came the final question. Mr. Harlan leaned back in his chair. "Last scenario. Suppose you join our team and find that a senior strategist, someone with tenure, is actively undercutting your project. They don't respond to emails, challenge your decisions in meetings, and go over your head. What do you do?" Catherine didn't hesitate. "I'd document everything," she said. "I'd remain professional, bring facts, not feelings, and address it directly with that person first. If the behavior continued, I'd escalate it. Respectfully but firmly. Because undermining doesn't just affect one employee. It damages trust, and trust is the root of strategy." Silence. Then, the sound of a door opening behind her. Footsteps. Confident. Unhurried. The panel looked up in unison, and Catherine turned her head. Liam. He walked in like he belonged there. which made sense because he did. Tall, composed, dressed in charcoal gray, he carried nothing but presence. He didn't speak right away. Just gave a curt nod to Mr. Harlan, then looked directly at Tasha. "Apologies for the interruption," he said. "I was told a candidate was being evaluated without full transparency of internal connections. That violates HR protocol." Tasha froze. Mr. Harlan blinked. "I wasn't aware there was a personal connection involved." Liam turned to Catherine, then to the panel. "Catherine Malik is my fiancé," he said calmly. No one moved. "And no," he added, "I did not pull strings to get her here. She applied blind. I had no influence on scheduling. But I also won't let this process continue without proper disclosure." He looked at Tasha one more time. "Especially when it seems this interview has been engineered." Catherine sat still, spine straight, heart pounding, but not from fear. This time it was something else. Something closer to power. The silence in the room was no longer awkward. It had calcified into something more dangerous. Uncertainty. 5 heads turned toward Liam. Only one didn't hide the flicker of panic behind their eyes, Tasha's. She stared at him as if he'd just risen from the grave of a secret she'd buried years ago. And in a way he had. Liam didn't blink. He stood at the threshold of the panel room, the door gently easing closed behind him with a slow mechanical hush, the kind that punctuates entrances with authority. Not rushed. Not loud. Just inevitable. He stepped forward once. "Again, apologies," he said, tone calm, diplomatic, but firm. "I wouldn't have interrupted, but I just became aware that one of my direct reports is conducting an interview involving my fiancé, without disclosure." Mr. Harlan's brows furrowed. "Direct report," he echoed. Liam didn't hesitate. "Tasha Malik reports directly to me in strategic oversight. We've worked together for 18 months. That conflict of interest should have been flagged the moment Catherine's application reached this panel." His eyes didn't leave Tasha's face. Catherine could feel it in her stomach. The shift. The room no longer revolved around intimidation. It revolved around truth, dragging itself up through layers of polite corporate artifice like something breaking through ice. Tasha, to her credit, remained composed. "Barely. I was not aware of their relationship," she said evenly, fingers laced tightly now. "Nor did I interfere with the scheduling." "You knew I applied 2 months ago," Catherine said, speaking for the first time since Liam entered. Her voice was steady, but she felt like she was walking a wire over glass. "We had coffee. I told you. You smiled and told me the corporate world was competitive." Tasha's lips twitched. "And I stand by that." Mr. Harlan cleared his throat, discomfort rippling through his professional demeanor like a crack in porcelain. "Let's take a step back. Liam, this is highly irregular." Liam smiled politely, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What's irregular is a candidate waiting over an hour while others are seen, only to be questioned by a sibling who failed to disclose their relation, and who has a history of documented disciplinary flags." "That's not relevant," Tasha snapped. "It is," Liam replied smoothly. "Because if even one panel member is operating with bias, the entire process is compromised. And I won't allow that on any floor I'm responsible for." Catherine's heart thudded in her chest like it wanted to scream. She wasn't used to this, being defended, being protected. The years of being quiet, pushing down her instincts, tolerating the edges of Tasha's ambition as they carved into her. Suddenly all of that felt distant. It felt like someone else's story. "Let me be very clear," Liam said, now addressing the full panel. "Catherine didn't ask for favoritism. She didn't even tell me she was interviewing until this morning, when I saw her name on the final list. She's never once tried to leverage our relationship for personal gain." Then he turned his eyes on Tasha again, soft but surgical. "Which is more than I can say for some people at this table." Tasha sat still, but her jaw had tightened. The angle of her neck changed, no longer poised but locked in battle stance. She blinked once, then twice, and finally turned to Mr. Harlan. "I'll recuse myself from the remainder of the panel," she said, her voice clipped, professional. Mr. Harlan didn't nod. He didn't thank her. He simply turned back to Liam and said, "We'll need to speak to HR about how this should proceed." Liam gave a brief nod. "Of course. I'll let you do that. I've said what I needed to say." Then, for the first time since entering, he looked at Catherine. Just one glance. It said everything. "I see you. I believe you. I'm here." And then he turned and left, as calmly as he had arrived. The door eased shut behind him. The room was still. So still, Catherine could hear the fluorescent lights hum. She looked down at the table, her untouched portfolio. Her fingers rested on its cover like a warrior returning to her sword. Tasha stood abruptly. "I'll be in my office," she said, and left. No one stopped her. When the door shut this time, it sounded more like defeat. Catherine stayed seated. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted them to see it, that she wasn't rushing out or breaking down or asking for anything. She was still there, still standing. And the game had just begun. The door shut behind Tasha like a final verdict. And for a full 15 seconds, no one moved. Not Mr. Harlan. Not Ms. Walker. Not the two junior directors who had remained quiet throughout the panel, now exchanging hesitant glances like they'd just witnessed something sacred or profane. Catherine stayed seated. She could feel the pulse in her throat, steady but assertive. Her hands were still folded neatly on the table. She didn't reach for her water, didn't fidget, didn't flinch. Mr. Harlan finally shifted, clearing his throat. "Well, Ms. Malik," he began, suddenly all business, all structure. "We'll need to take a short recess. This is an unusual situation. HR will likely want to follow up." Catherine nodded slowly. "Of course. Someone will escort you to the holding lounge," he added, standing. "I can find it," Catherine said, her voice smooth but layered with steel. He didn't argue. Ms. Walker gave her a faint smile, one that said, "I see what just happened. I won't say it, but I saw it." Catherine gathered her things and left the panel room without looking back. This time, she was the one walking through glass hallways with certainty. She was the one making silence feel like strength. The HR floor was quieter, less polished, more real, a little worn at the edges. The kind of place where policies are rewritten behind closed doors and reputations either recover or rot. They made her wait. But this time it felt different. Not a delay. A pause. Preparation. Eventually, a woman named Rosa emerged from a side door and led her into a small, warm-toned office. No windows. One potted plant that looked genuinely alive. On the desk, water, tissues, a notepad, and 2 pens. The "We're listening" kit. "Catherine," Rosa said gently, sitting across from her, "we're conducting a formal review of what occurred in that interview. I want to be clear. This is not an investigation into you. You did nothing wrong. But there are patterns here." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Patterns?" Rosa hesitated, then chose honesty. "This isn't the first time Tasha Malik's name has surfaced in relation to panel bias. Nothing ever stuck. Most candidates don't push back. But this," she gestured vaguely, meaning today, "this is different. It's internal now. It's visible. We can't ignore it." Catherine let that sink in. "And if I hadn't been engaged to someone in the executive suite?" she asked softly. Rosa winced. "Then I imagine your application would have been quietly buried, like the others." Catherine nodded. "So now what?" "We've pulled the footage," Rosa said, opening a file folder. "Every interview room in Aventus Logic records panels. It's mostly for training purposes, but in this case, it's evidence. We saw everything." Catherine let out a long, quiet breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding one since Liam walked into that room. "I'd like to submit something," she said, reaching into her portfolio and pulling out a single printed email. "This is the message I sent to Tasha the day after our coffee. I thanked her for the chat and told her I'd decided to apply here." Rosa read it silently, then added it to the file. "She knew," Catherine said. "She knew, and she said nothing." "She will be suspended pending the investigation," Rosa replied carefully. "Effective immediately." And just like that, the words took shape in the room. Not whispered. Not imagined. Spoken. Suspended. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like truth finally landing in the room and finding a chair to sit in. Later that evening, Catherine stood in front of her apartment mirror. The hallway was quiet. She could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the low rumble of the city outside. She stared at her reflection. Really stared. Not the quick glance before heading out the door. Not the inspection of flaws or flyaways. Just herself. Entirely. And as she looked, she remembered. The 7th grade debate where Tasha convinced the teacher that Catherine had cheated. The Christmas dinner where Tasha toasted herself for getting Dad's promotion, even as Catherine silently passed the green beans. The letters Catherine used to write in her journal, not addressed to Santa or friends, but to someone, anyone who might believe her version of events. All those memories had existed like background noise. But tonight, they rearranged into a pattern. It wasn't just one bad day. It was a system, a history. Tasha had always been the story everyone accepted. But tonight, Catherine began writing a new one. She opened her laptop. Not to email, not to journal, but to update her resume. The apartment was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't just come from silence, but from the air after a storm, thick, unsettled, waiting for something else to fall. Catherine stood barefoot in her living room, a cup of chamomile cooling in her hands. The sun had just slipped beneath the Chicago skyline, leaving behind long strips of orange and pale pink, streaked like bruises across the sky. The kind of beauty you could miss if you blinked. She hadn't turned on the lights yet. Instead, she let the shadows gather around her like familiar ghosts. They didn't scare her. Not anymore. On the far shelf beneath the window, a thin white box sat crooked between books. She hadn't opened it in years. Not since she moved into this apartment and shoved it there on instinct, unable to toss it, but unwilling to face it. Now, without knowing why, she walked over and pulled it down. The lid made a dry, papery sound as she lifted it. Inside were letters, some typed, most handwritten, all folded carefully and unsent. Catherine sat cross-legged on the rug, the box in front of her, her fingers skimming the soft, worn edges of memory. The first envelope had no date. Just a single word on the front, written in slanted blue ink. You. She unfolded it and read. I don't know who you are or if you'll ever read this. Maybe you're the older version of me. Maybe you're no one. But I want someone to hear what I can't say out loud. I want someone to know that when Tasha lies, she doesn't blink. That when I tell the truth, it always sounds like a story I'm making up. That I've stopped raising my hand because I'm tired of hearing people sigh when I speak. I want someone to know that I see it. All of it, even if no one believes me yet. Catherine folded it again, slower this time, as if laying down a fragile truth. She reached for another. Dear Dad, I know you didn't mean it the way it sounded when you said, she's just more focused than you. I know you were proud of her job, her internship, her awards. I was proud too. But when you looked at her, you smiled with your whole face. When you looked at me, you asked if I'd remembered to iron my shirt. I want to be seen. Just once. For something other than what I failed to become. There were more. Letters from her college dorm, written after long nights staring at ceilings. Notes scrawled during early job interviews that went nowhere. A list of things she wished she had said during fights but instead swallowed like gravel. And tucked near the bottom, a card, never mailed, addressed to Tasha. The envelope was sealed. Still, her thumb hovered over the flap, but she didn't open it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. All the things she never said to her sister because she'd convinced herself it wasn't worth it. Because some part of her always believed she'd be blamed for the fallout. Catherine leaned back on her palms, exhaling slowly. This wasn't sadness. Not anymore. It was recognition. The kind that comes when you've lived so long in a shadow that the sunlight feels aggressive at first. Too bright, too warm, too real. But now she didn't flinch. Now she saw it for what it was. She stood, placed the box on the kitchen table, and opened her laptop. She didn't open job boards. Didn't check her inbox. She opened a blank document. The cursor blinked. Alive. Waiting. She began to write, not to someone else, but to herself. Dear Catherine, you weren't wrong. You weren't weak. You weren't too quiet, or too sensitive, or too scattered. You were just waiting for the world to stop interrupting you long enough to hear your voice. Now they've heard it. Now you've heard it. And from here on out, you speak. She hit save. Not send. This wasn't for them. This was for the version of herself who'd once thought being invisible was safer. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. 3 days later. A Wednesday morning that began like any other, until it didn't. Catherine sat at her small kitchen table, coffee half finished, laptop open but untouched. The city outside moved on as it always did. Buses exhaled, cyclists cursed at cab drivers, and the wind played tricks between the alleys like it was late for something. Inside, the quiet stretched around her. She hadn't heard anything since the HR meeting. No follow-up. No apology. No rejection. Just silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all. Her phone buzzed against the ceramic coaster. Unknown number. No voicemail. She let it ring out. Then a second buzz, this time a notification. Email. Subject, Aventus Logic, follow-up from interview process. She stared at it for a moment. Then clicked. Dear Ms. Malik, we thank you again for your participation in the Strategic Development Panel interview earlier this week. After reviewing both your credentials and the events surrounding the session, we would like to inform you that the original panel decision has been invalidated due to conflict of interest. Your candidacy was re-evaluated by an impartial committee composed of senior leadership outside the affected department. Based on this second review, we are pleased to extend to you an offer for the position of Strategic Development Manager, reporting directly to the Vice President of Strategy. The offer details are attached. We are prepared to match your desired salary range and offer relocation support should you require it. Please respond within 72 hours. We are sincerely impressed by the professionalism and integrity you demonstrated throughout this process. Aventus Logic, Talent Acquisition. Catherine sat very still. She didn't smile. Not yet. Instead, she leaned back, staring at the screen like it might vanish. Not because she was surprised they offered, but because they used the word integrity. Not qualified, not talented, but integrity. That word hit deeper than any job title. She clicked the attachment, scanned the numbers, the benefits, the reporting line. Vice President of Strategy. Liam. She shook her head softly and let out a breath that felt years overdue. Her phone buzzed again. This time a text. From Liam. 10:41 a.m. Saw the offer come through. Didn't say anything. You earned it without me. Another message followed seconds later. 10:42 a.m. But I've reserved the window office across from mine. Just in case you say yes. She stared at the text for a moment. Then, for the first time that morning, a smile crept across her face. Not the practiced, interview-ready kind. A real one. One with teeth. One that made her eyes narrow and her shoulders drop like someone had just unclenched the whole world. She stood and walked toward the window. The city looked different now, not softer but somehow less hostile. Like it had stopped testing her and started watching. Waiting. She thought of Tasha. HR had confirmed she'd been placed on administrative leave pending formal review. There was no drama, no headlines. Just accountability. Quiet, overdue accountability. Tasha hadn't reached out. And Catherine didn't expect her to. Some stories end without closure. Some doors stay shut. But today there was a new one. Wide open. With her name, only her name, on the placard. She turned back to her laptop. Clicked reply. Typed slowly, deliberately. Dear Aventus team. Thank you for your offer. I'm honored and ready. Let's begin. She hit send. Not with trembling hands. Not with a breath held in suspense. With purpose. Then she closed the laptop and walked to her closet. Picked out a deep green blazer she'd never dared to wear before. Too bold, too noticeable. Today it was perfect. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusted the collar, and smiled at the woman staring back. This wasn't a comeback. This wasn't revenge. This was arrival. And this time, no one was rewriting her story but her. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.